Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. I am your host, Christy Haberman. I am glad you're here. Thanks for being a part of our community. A few disclaimers before we get started. I am a licensed therapist. However, this podcast is not to be considered mental health therapy or counseling. It is for entertainment purposes only and is not associated with my counseling practice, Christy Haberman Counseling Services. Thanks for showing up. Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. This is your host, Christy Haberman. I haven't recorded since before the Christmas holiday. It was a little unexpected how much the grief hit me this year. It might have been because we spent the holiday alone, which is always a trigger for me. I guess you'd call it a passion project. I never intended it to be something that I would make money at or have a large following at. It was because grief was not what I thought it was. And I'll explain that a little bit. I am educated as a counselor. I'm licensed as a counselor. And so I thought I had it all figured out. Nothing will humble you faster. I got to tell you this. Nothing will humble you faster than having a tragedy hit you and you realize what you thought you knew, you didn't know. But I think what was almost worse was the reaction of the people around me. People just left. People quit talking to me. I lost friends. I lost family. And I needed to talk about it. And there was no one to talk about it. And at that time, there wasn't grief Instagram. There wasn't grief Facebook. There were some groups on Facebook, but none that I felt like could talk about these things. They mostly talked about how much they missed their child, but they didn't talk about the ugly stuff, I call it. So I wrote a book in 2000, I think I published it in 2015, about what it was like to be a grieving mom. And that satisfied me for a little bit. But then 3 years ago, I would wake up in the middle of the night and know that I was missing my calling, that I was supposed to do this podcast, and that it was part of my purpose on this earth to do it. And so night after night, I would get up in the middle of the night, and I was most afraid of my voice on a podcast. I got asked if I would do YouTube videos. That's a whole nother ball game, because then I'd have my face on the computer as opposed to my voice, and just not sure that I am down for that, but maybe in the future. And then those times when I get teary-eyed, it's when you're on the podcast and it's coming across the speaker. Yeah, you can hear it in my voice, but if I was on camera, you would see it. So I'm still reconciling whether or not I'm going to do that. But I would stay up at night, or when I'd wake up in the night, knowing that this is what I was supposed to do. I would practice on my iPad. And then I just started. And this podcast has become like a diary. So if you've come to this podcast expecting me to give advice on how to survive losing a child, I don't have it for you. I think that it's very individual. I think that it's based off of our life experiences. I can share what my time has been like. I can share what other people's time has been like. But I don't have the magic solution, nor do I pretend to have the magic solution. I just talk about what's going on. And so I've started doing this series called Journal with Me. I got to tell you, writing down everything that my child missed in the last year was very hard. Because I don't know that I ever put it so concretely. So when you write it down, it becomes real. And then you have to look at what was missed. But then there's also a sense of relief because here I am, I'm sharing with you what was lost or what happened in the year. So it's a way to include you in your life. So if some of you really struggle with doing the exercise, I just want you to know that I understand. I don't know if I could have done it very early in my grief. It was hard enough now. I noticed in the month of January, just on my personal Facebook and places, that I've been a lot more vocal about my grief. Kind of gone back to the old ways of sharing. I had coworkers that I worked with for 3 or 4 years that had no idea I'd lost a child and were my Facebook friends. That's how well I kept it hidden. So they were flabbergasted when I posted a video of us going to put a Christmas tree on his grave this year. It was just really quite sad. And because Christopher died when he was 25, they expect me to say that he died of suicide. They really don't expect to hear that he died of cancer. So it's now the new year. And I don't know how you feel about New Year's resolutions. I didn't make any. Because when you look forward, it is so hard thinking about what you left behind. For many people, the new year is very difficult. It'll be 12 years in July that Christopher's died. Somebody across the United States, or even listening to my podcast, that it'll be year 2, or year 3, or year 4, 5, 6, any of those years. And it's not something to celebrate. Because there's this worry that the farther away you get from the death, the more you will forget. And I assure you that is not the case. I just want you to know that is not the case. That you will never forget. And I do feel like sometimes that I don't remember Christopher's voice, but then I hear it in my head and I realize that's a memory. It's a memory of him. So I think those will stay too. We live in an age where we have endless pictures and videos, and those are both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it helps us remember. It's a curse because it makes you realize that you're never going to hear their voice again. So for those of you entering in the new year, don't worry about making New Year's resolutions. Some of you may be going from, I just got to make it through the next day, or the next day, and the next day. You may be struggling to survive. I know in the beginning, that first year was brutal, and part of me didn't want to wake up the next day. I'd have been perfectly happy if I'd been called home. I wasn't going to go out of my way to make that happen, but I dearly wanted to be back with my son again. So for those of you that are facing a new year without your child, I just want to send you some love and light, some empathy, and some strength to get through the next year. So right now, you may hear it in the background. We're in a really severe blizzard here where I live in South Dakota. It's minus 44 degrees with the wind chill. So we've been kind of stuck in the house. And I realized that it's not so bad to be stuck in the house. But it does activate my grief a little bit because you run out of things to do. And then I spend a lot of time thinking, and thinking's not always good for you. Sometimes we just have to feel and be in the moment. So if I were to think about a journaling topic for this week, I think that I would say to journal on giving yourself permission to not have New Year's resolutions. That's what I would say. That it's okay to not plan out the next year. And write about what that's like. What if for the next year you just chose to live each day as it comes? So what would that look like? That would look like when you got up in the morning, you would honor how you feel. Most of us have to work for a living. So if your body says, today I want to be sad because I'm missing my child, because last year we were maybe at a soccer tournament, or the year before we were at a concert. Maybe it's their birthday. So you let yourself feel whatever you feel and not try to minimize it, not try to make the people around you feel less uncomfortable. That you just allow yourself to be. And you continue to go on throughout your day. Some people choose to share their grief. Some people are more uncomfortable sharing their grief. It doesn't matter as long as it's the way that you want to do it. So when you find yourself thinking about, I can't face another anniversary like this without the person that I loved, remind yourself that you're staying in the moment just today. We're just trying to get through today. And it's worse, I think, during the winter time. So if some of you may be in the South, and I don't know if seasonal affective disorder impacts any of you down south, but I know up here in the northern states with the lights and the cold, with the seasonal affective disorder, we go to work in the dark, we come back in the dark. And more often than not, we have these cold spells that last for a long time. So we're not expected to get above zero until the end of January. And that's kind of a little on the heartbreaking side because it's hard and it's cold. And I don't know about you, but when I get into that state, I ruminate about things. So what ruminating means is that you chew on it for a while, just like a cow. You know, they have the 3 stomachs, so they regurgitate their food, chew on it for a while, they swallow it, regurgitate it. We do that with our thoughts too. And so you ruminate, you think about it, and then you stop, and you think about it, and you stop, and you think about it. And that happens a lot with that I wish I coulda, woulda, shoulda done something to prevent whatever the death was. People do that all the time. And it doesn't matter. I have seen it over and over and over again. Not even with people that have lost children, just random people I meet and have conversations with. They talk about someone who just died and they say, well, if I would have been there, this wouldn't happen. If I would have been there, this wouldn't happen. I have come to understand, just as a person, as a human being, that that's a natural part of the grieving process, because we don't want to believe that we are powerless over whether or not someone dies. So we want to believe that if we had the power, we could have changed the outcome. And that is one of the hardest beliefs for people to work through when it comes to losing someone. And it's not necessarily even with a child. But we live in a society where we've somewhat conquered nature, right? We live in buildings, we have cars. We're not necessarily subject to that. Well, actually, nowadays with the catastrophic events that are happening, that might not be the case, but for a long time. And so it's not often that as human beings we feel powerless. And that's what death does to you. So when your brain starts to go to that place, when you're ruminating, you have to train it to say, there's nothing I could have done. And there's a level of acceptance that has to come with that. And it's very hard to do. So when you're practicing and writing about just living in that day-to-day moments, and you start ruminating on that, I coulda, woulda, shoulda done whatever, X, Y, and Z. You need to tell your brain to stop and say, I'm focusing just on today. Focusing, because there's this abundance of people saying I have ADHD. It's on TikTok, it's on Facebook, it's on Instagram. Understand that we have trained people to not be able to focus. I've noticed it myself, but I actually do have ADHD. The struggle bus is real. I was misdiagnosed when I was a child because I was a girl. Girls aren't hyper, no. And I also have the daydream time kind, where I just daydream all the time. But I have noticed, because I watch YouTube videos a lot that are 10 to 15 minutes long, my attention span has really gone downhill. I really have to pay attention to a show if it goes longer than 15 to 20 minutes. And I'm one of those people that's really usually watching a show and reading at the same time, which I was able to do a lot more when I was younger. But our kids that are growing up now, and us as adults, we're getting information in shorter and shorter pieces, which makes us not able to hold the focus for a long period of time. So we have to retrain ourselves. And that is especially true with our thoughts. And we have so many things that are interfering with our ability to focus. Like for me, did you just hear that ding on my computer? My computer just dinged. If somebody's talking over here, I'll lose my focus. So we have to train ourselves. And that's what you're doing when you say, no, in this moment, I'm going to think about just today. You're going to train yourself to think about just today. And there'll be time later to figure out that I would have, could have, should have done something. There'll be lots of time later for that. It's my belief that it takes years to get through that. And there's nothing in the counseling literature or anything that says that that's a part of grief. But in my experience and what I have noticed in dealing with grieving people for years now, that everyone, whether it be a friend, family, child, wishes they would have, could have done something to have changed the outcome. And that's all it is. So that's one thing that I want you to understand is many people will say, well, you're feeling guilty about whatever happened. And that may be true. That may be true. But really what the root of it is the fact that we want to change the outcome. We want to be powerful enough to change the outcome. And we can't. And for people that have issues with power and control, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but we were brought up, a lot of us, this is where anxiety comes from, that we have to have control over everything. It's really hard to do, to have control over everything. And especially us as parents and mothers, we were trained that we had to control everything, and we weren't the perfect mothers. That was a major issue for me when my son died, was this whole belief system I had that I was a bad mother. It was a struggle. And I talk about it in a couple of my other episodes. I think it called the bad mother crisis, I think I called it. Clear back when. But if you're struggling with that, I want you to know that I believe that's really common. But you have to have like a really deep relationship with someone in order to be able to tease those things out. And again, this is a personal belief. This doesn't apply to all therapists, but I have found that very few therapists can go to that deep emotional place with you. And it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because they can't go to that deep personal place within themselves. They're not comfortable with it. So if you have a therapist that cannot go to that deep place within you where you are on your knees sobbing, then you need a different therapist. Because what you need in grief is someone to walk beside you. You don't need someone to interpret it for you. You don't need somebody to analyze it away for you. You need someone to help you carry it, which means being in that moment with you. So if you're having one of those days where you're on your knees and sobbing, find someone that'll walk through it with you. And there's always one person that will never leave you, and that is yourself. And this is one time that you have to show up for yourself. Because in the end, no one can come into our space and say, I understand what you're feeling about losing your child, because we don't. It changes for every person. But there is one person that knows, and that is you. So you have to show up for yourself. And if you're not, ask yourself why. Why can't I show up for myself? Because at that moment, you matter. Nothing else does. The job doesn't. Nothing else matters. I had a private practice that was very minimal at first when Christopher died. And I realized that that might have prolonged my grief a little bit because I didn't have anything else to focus on. So again, it goes back to living in the moment. So I spent a lot of time ruminating while I was waiting in between clients. And I also had a part-time job stocking shelves. I wanted to do something completely different from counseling. And also, if I worked for another agency, I would be competing with them for clients. So I stocked shelves. And that's what I wanted. I wanted mindless work so I could just stock the shelves. And that's what I did. So as we go into this new year and we go into January, I encourage all of you to write about giving yourself permission just to be in the moment. No New Year's resolutions. But write about giving yourself permission to be in the moment. And how you do that. Let's talk about how to do that a little bit. Okay, so right now, I'm in the moment. I am here with you. I am acutely aware that there will be people that will be listening to me talk. I can hear the wind blowing outside. I can hear my dog downstairs. I can feel myself sitting in the chair. It's kind of hot. Even though it's minus 44 below, the sun is coming in my window, so I feel kind of hot. I can hear the computer running. So that's being in the moment. Now, I'm aware that right now, no one is listening to me record this podcast, besides the dog who just whined, if you heard that. No one else is here. But when I'm talking into this microphone, I feel like there are people that are listening. It's always been that way with the recording. So I'm aware that people are out there and they were listening. And so through the microphone, I'm developing this connection, I feel. And that helps me be in the moment. So that's what it looks like. So when you get up in the morning and you do this body scan, how do I feel? Where am I? What's going on with me? And you have those moments of I don't want to get up because my loved one wasn't here. You say, I'll get up just for today. And then you get up. I give myself permission not to think about it just for today. So everything becomes just for today. And before you know it, it's the end of the day. So it's time to go back to sleep. And then you may wake up in the middle of the night like I did and give yourself permission just for today to go back to sleep. What you're doing in those moments is you are honoring yourself and you are honoring your grief. And I know it's hard to believe, but the more we honor our grief, the more we take care of ourselves, the easier it becomes to live with. But if you're shoving it away, trying to put it in a little box, trying not to think about it or deal with it, what you're doing is prolonging your grief and making it harder for yourself. And also, it's not very kind. Think about on the playground when you were a little kid and there was someone bullying you and everybody around you ignored you. And they could see them hitting you, but they just ignored you. That's kind of like what grief is like. Except you're the one watching it hurt you. You say, grief, let's be friends. I know you're a friend for a lifetime, so how are we going to learn to live together? How are we going to learn to accompany this body that we both inhabit? And I've heard people say that their grief has gotten better. That's great. That's wonderful for you. You could share some tips with the rest of us that still struggle. But I suspect if that is the case, you're not listening to this podcast. So thanks for listening. So remember that next week we are going to journal on giving ourselves permissions to live in the moment and what that's going to look like. Thanks for listening.